And I think I have the ability to mute you. So if there is some background noise, I might mute you. Fair warning there. If there seems to be some broadband issues with video, one of the things you can do is just to turn off your video, and that might help. I think so far when we were on earlier today, everything was working well, so we'll hope that that continues. If you have questions as the panelists are speaking and answering other questions, you can feel free to drop your question into the chat to me. You can just message it to me privately, and we can try to get as many of those answered as possible. I know our time's going to go by really quickly this evening, and we want to try to answer as much as we can. So if you do have a question, please feel free to drop it in the chat. And I think with that, we are about ready to go. I think most everyone who is registered is here. So I'm going to start just by saying welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I greatly appreciate it. I am delighted that you are here. And it looks like most everyone is on mute, so thank you. I appreciate that. One more time, if the video broadband is not working, you can go ahead and turn off your video to try to help. And if you have questions for me, you can drop them into the chat, or questions for our panelists, you can message them into the chat. For those of you who are on, my name is Melissa Romano, and I'm running to be your next state superintendent of public instruction. And I am just so glad you are here to listen to our panelists and take part in a conversation that I think is very important, which is centering around mental health. Mental health has been an issue in my campaign since I started my campaign. It's a issue that is important to me, and so I've included it in my platform from day one. As a public school educator in my classroom, I have been very passionate about social emotional learning, and so I'm just really glad to have an opportunity to put an emphasis and a focus on mental health. And with that, I want to introduce our panelists, because we have a whole crew of just some amazing experts who are here with me this evening to join in the conversation. So first off, I have Dr. Ann Douglas, who is the director of Missoula Native Connections, a suicide and substance use prevention program at All Nations Health Center in Missoula. Dr. Douglas has worked with Native youth and their families for over 10 years. She is dedicated to providing support to and empowering Native youth. She is an enrolled member of the Blackfeet Nation and a proud mother of 4 amazing children. And if you want to just unmute yourself and say hello, then we can all make sure that we see you.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to be here.
Thank you so much. We are glad you are here. So my next guest is Lily Gervais, and she is the Behavioral Health Supervisor at All Nations Health Center. She is a Blackfeet tribal member from Browning, Montana, and Lily came to Missoula in 2001 to attend the University of Montana and graduated with a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's degree in social work. She is a dual licensed as a licensed clinical social worker, an LCSW, and a licensed addiction counselor, an LAC, and has worked in the addiction field since 2005 in various capacities.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Our next panelist is Dr. Cora Neumann, and she is a public health expert and recently founded We Are Montana to support public health leadership across rural and Native Montana. Over the past 20 years, she has collaborated with local and national leaders to bring quality, accessible healthcare to their communities, including during the current COVID outbreak. She most recently ran for U.S. Senate here in her home state of Montana and serves on the boards of Columbia University School of Public Health, Haven, COVID Local, and is a member of the Montana Public Health Association. Welcome, Cora.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Speaking of public health, even though I told my kids in mental health that I'm, moderating something tonight, they still keep knocking on the door. So they may join us.
I can definitely relate. I have 2 teenagers running around the house right now. I'm hoping one of them takes the other one to ballet here very quickly, or I will be telling them to do that. Our next panelist is Kathy Kinsella Shea. She is a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist in private practice in Helena. Kathy is currently an international instructor and trainer for MSU's Center for Mental Health Research and Recovery's Youth Aware of Mental Health, YAM program. YAM is an evidence-based and culturally sensitive mental health promotion and suicide prevention program for adolescents that is taught worldwide. Welcome, Kathy.
Hello, everybody. I'm so excited to be here tonight having this discussion with you all.
Excellent. And last but certainly not least, Dr. John Sommers-Flanagan is a professor of counseling at the University of Montana, a clinical psychologist and author or co-author of over 100 publications, including 8 books and numerous professional training videos. His books, co-written with his wife Rita, include Tough Kids, Cool Counseling, and more. John is a sought-out keynote speaker and a professional workshop trainer in the areas of counseling youth, working with parents, suicide assessment, and happiness. He has published many newspaper columns, op-ed pieces, and an article in Slate magazine. He is also the co-host of the national Practically Perfect Parenting podcast.
Thank you, Melissa. It's great to see everybody. And Melissa, thank you for being the kind of person who supports and promotes mental health. That's wonderful.
Absolutely. I am delighted that you are all here. And with that, I want to let everyone know who's on just kind of what you can expect from this evening and our time together. We're going to start with just talking a little bit about our current reality and COVID and mental health and sort of what people are seeing and how we can all be committed to this conversation of improving mental health for folks. And we want to spend sort of the last part of our time together giving you some takeaways that you can take with you that you could implement or start doing as soon as we are off of our Zoom call this evening, just to be thinking about your own mental health and thinking about how you can help those who are near and dear to you and those who you love with their mental health. And so that's sort of our agenda. We have lots and lots of questions. And so I want to just say thank you for those of you who registered and sent in questions. We are going to try to get to as many as we can. There were a lot of them. And so with that, I am going to get started with our first question. And again, if questions come up as we are going through this evening, please feel free to utilize the chat function and message a question to me, and we'll see if we can get it answered. So the first question I have is, obviously COVID, racism, and other contemporary problems are contributing to recent increases in mental health problems. But what are some of the underlying explanations for why these events and issues adversely affect mental health? And I don't know if John, if you want to start?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Those particular issues, COVID, racial oppression, income inequality, things like that, they're the worst kinds of stressors because they're both aversive, they're painful, they're difficult, but they're also not in our control. And it's not a big surprise that those particular kinds of stressors will increase anxiety and depression in particular. And anxiety and depression are, of course, 2 very common symptoms, and they are really generated or caused to a large degree by situational factors like the ones that you mentioned.
Thanks, John. I don't know, Lily or Anne, if you wanted to add anything to that.
Sure.
Sorry, Lily. I was going to say, emotions like anger, anxiety, sadness that come along with oppression or racism are understandable reactions. And so when you do have those feelings, or somebody else that you're working with or students that you're working with have those are normal reactions to really painful experiences. And I just wanted to throw that in there.
I think in addition to that, right now, race is very much in our our view in the news and with all of the protests that are happening across the US. And the people who are particularly affected by COVID right now are people of color. And so, it seems to be very much in the forefront of my mind as a person of color, which I think, if COVID wasn't happening, all of these things would be contributing to depression and anxiety anyway. So then in addition, we have all of these other things happening in the US that are negatively affecting people on reservations and in poor communities. So.
Yeah, thanks, Lily. And I appreciate all three of your perspectives. I think from a teacher perspective, one of the things that has really happened because of COVID is that there's really this light shining on mental health issues. And, this is just such an opportunity for us to come together as Montanans and really dig in. Mental health, the need for mental health support is not new. I think that right now, just with COVID, there's just an increased awareness and a focus on it, which is why I'm so glad that you are all here tonight to talk about this. I do want to let know that one of our panelists did lose power, and so Cora Neumann is working on getting back on. So we'll hope that happens. Of course, technology is great until it isn't. That is our reality right now. So I want to move on to our next question, and I please in the chat, if you feel like I am rushing as the moderator, please feel free to tell me to slow down or speed up. That's the other thing about technology is it's hard to read the room and read body language. I'm used to the teacher being able to read my students' faces. So this next question is a little bit about a classroom, and the question is, I feel my district has given a lot of latitude to families who are concerned about their children's physical health needs during the pandemic. However, students with mental health illnesses exacerbated by the current conditions are not being treated equally. How can I help my district better understand the real needs of students with diagnosed depression and anxiety? And I can definitely weigh in as a teacher perspective, but if others on the panel have an opinion, please feel free to chime in as well. So I will say from a teacher perspective, this is a great example of really thinking about who we elect to our local school boards. Montana is a local control state, and so our local school boards make decisions about curriculum and how standards are met. And so I would say, pay attention to your local school boards. But I would also say from my teaching perspective, I would say, this is just a real time to reach out. None of us have ever experienced a worldwide pandemic. We've never had to rely on technology so much to be able to teach and reach our students. My mantra has always been, reach, teach, inspire, and then empower. And we, every teacher, schools know that we need to be able to reach our students. We've never really had to do that in a way that we are having to do it right now. And so I would say, this is an example where relationships are so important. And so I would say, reach out, just talk to your school, talk to your teacher, have that open communication and the dialogue. And I know, Kathy, if you have anything else you want to add.
Well, I just think it's interesting because we so often want to separate out health and mental health, right? And the reality is that we don't have good health unless we're mentally healthy, unless we're connected to our emotions and our emotional state and our cognitions as well. And so I think that there's a little bit of education that can happen. What I've seen over time, though, in the last few years is that a lot of districts are becoming more and more aware of the impact of mental health difficulties on their kids and those challenges. And they're trying to rise to meet those challenges, but they're doing it with very little funding and not a lot of extra support. And so I think too that that's another area that we really need to do some work in, is to get that funding available to educate administrators, teachers, school personnel, because they really are frontline workers, because they're the people that have those relationships. They're the people that have that consistency and that availability to their students. I think that's been really challenged with the umbrella of COVID right now.
Yeah, so well said, Kathy. And it's why I've been saying all along, it's why it's so important to have a leader at the Office of Public Instruction and someone who is going to be advocating at the legislature for funding. Absolutely. So our next question is specific about the virus, and it's how should parents address the fear of contracting the virus and spreading it to vulnerable family members?
I'll jump in on that. My power's back on. Thanks for your patience. I mean, this is, one of the things that I think there is real, COVID fatigue is real. Fear of COVID and being really vigilant. I think we all jumped on board and followed really strict guidelines for the first few months. And as time drags on and the virus stays with us, there is fatigue. And with that, it's sort of letting down of the guard. And so fear of spreading this virus may actually increase in a different way. And the one thing that we continue to share with communities and lead public health officials and educators is that wearing a mask, social distancing, keeping windows and doors open and ventilation going, that's something that you will, if you just make sure you stick to those basic things. Remember, you're always wearing a mask around grandma and she's always wearing a mask. You're always washing your hands when you come home and go in and out of the house or the building. And you're always keeping distance from anyone who's vulnerable. Those things, because there's so many things to think about, right? Between juggling this online school and work and the changing directives and is it spreading? There's a lot. And I think that it's really, really important to come back to those three things. And if you stick to those diligently for as long as this virus is among us, that it kind of gives a sense of ease and to just really simplify, because we're juggling a lot. And again, that's why we're having this panel, because everyone's mental health is pretty stretched thin. So I would just say the answer to that is to keep it simple and stick to those three basic guidelines.
I think that's really great. And I would add to that, to make it a routine, make sure the whole family is on board, make it fun when you can, be in it together. This is not a political issue. The three things you mentioned, Cora, they're medical issues. And we need to make sure that we take care of those as a family, as a unit, and that we celebrate in some ways our ability to keep ourselves safe.
Yeah, thanks, John. Kathy, did you want to add to that?
I'm just thinking about my work with littles here. And I think the most important thing that I'm going to echo everything that was just said, but I think the most important thing we can do about fear is that kids watch us. They watch the adults in their lives to see how they're feeling. They're scanning their environments, especially in a crisis situation, to see how we're going to react. So it's really, really important for us to do our work too. COVID is scary. And so we need to admit that to ourselves, but we also need to take steps to remain calm, because our kids are going to look to us. And if we're able to do our own work, they will follow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned the littles. I want to kind of just talk about the other end on the teenagers. So I have 4 teenagers in the house, and this summer we had to decide, what we wanted to do for school. And in Helena, there was a deadline where we had to decide if, kids were going to go back, if we wanted to participate in all online learning or if we wanted to participate in a hybrid model. And it was actually the first time I heard my 16-year-old son say that he was very worried about getting Nana and Papa sick. And he was very scared. And I just wasn't thinking about that. I was really thinking about, like you said, Kathy, little kids that being really worried and fearful of that. And it was I'm glad he told me, because I just hadn't really thought, but going back to, what Cora said, that's what it's exactly what I did. We just talked about science, and there are things we can do to stay safe. Just like we do when we have other sicknesses like the cold, there are precautions we do to keep everyone around us safe. And that's the same with COVID. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
You mind if I just wanted, actually, if you don't mind, ask Anna and Lily, because I've been working quite a bit with Native communities, and there's a pretty high percentage of intergenerational homes. And I know that the fear of transmission there is really heightened. And so I'm sorry if you don't mind, Melissa, I'd love also to hear. That's something that's definitely heavy on our minds.
Yeah, I think you know, my response is twofold, because I'm a mom. I'm a mom of teenagers and of little kids. I have 4 boys at home, and you know, what I tell my teenage boys is going to be very different than what I tell my little boys. And you know, so that's, you know, in my own household it's different. But then in, you know, working with our Native community, you know, we're taught from, you know, birth to be very to live communally, and to live, we're not individuals, you know, we live together and we take care of each other. And asking our communities to separate and isolate it really goes against what our cultural teachings are. And so I'm sure many of you have read in the news, you know, the high rates on the Navajo reservation were kind of in the news there for a while. But in our own state, the Northern Cheyenne and Crow reservations both have really high rates, and it is really challenging to help families balance, you know, taking precaution and being safe, taking care of themselves, but also being aware of, you know, their own communities and their family members. I know, you know, I think this comes back to question number 1, actually, for me, is that, you know, right now, Native people and people of color historically have not had quality health care. And, you know, that's a fact for a person of color. And so it's not just a matter of fighting a cold for us. For many of our people, it's a matter of fighting for our lives. And we don't have a lot of the quality healthcare that many communities do, maybe many non-people of color receive. And so it's really a challenge to work with individuals on, you know, staying safe and making good choices, but also, you know, having to recognize that, you know, a person is going to go home to the reservation for a funeral, because that's what we do. We show up for our families and we mourn in a way that, you know, we have for hundreds of years. And so it goes against everything that we're taught. And that's especially challenging, I think. And really the reason for so many of the positive COVID cases in our communities.
I don't have anything else to add. Lily did a great job.
Excellent. Yes, thank you for adding that. I think it's so important that all voices are represented, and you're absolutely right. Kind of sticking along, you know, we talked a little bit about fear and kids being fearful of transmitting COVID. Kind of along those same lines is, you know, educators are also worried about contracting COVID and passing it along to others. But there's a whole host of other worries that I've heard educators are talking about, you know, just having to transition to teaching remotely again, you know, so many unknowns. And so that brings up a lot of worry. And of course, you know, there's just this trauma that we've all experienced. I'm wondering if you would sort of address like trauma-informed practices, or, you know, how trauma affects students who are trying to learn new things. And I can jump in first and give you my teacher perspective. Okay, I see Kathy smiling at me. So I can tell you from my teaching perspective, I told you earlier that my sort of my motto has always been reach, teach, inspire, and empower. And you know, that reaching students, in my experience, it's not always easy, because we do have students who have experienced trauma, and it doesn't always show up, you know, how it manifests doesn't always show up right away. It can show up years and years later. And so there's all sorts of ways trauma can manifest, whether it's, you know, behavior outbursts or just shutting down, rapid heartbeat. You know, I've had students in the past who have gotten physically ill. And so those are all ways that we can see trauma in students. And that the brain and the heart, I would say, are so connected. And if one of them is off kilter, they have a hard time working together. And so it's so important that Going back to what Kathy said initially, that, if you're not mentally well, you're not well. And I see that so much as a teacher. I don't know, Kathy, if you want to add on to any of that.
Yeah, I worry a lot about what's happened, because I think what the pandemic has shown us is just how intricately woven our school districts are, our public schools are, to the fabric of our communities, and that our schools serve so much more of a purpose than just academics, right? And so there are a lot of gaps that have been exacerbated and made worse by what's happening right now, by distance learning, and especially in the spring when everything just fell out from under us so quickly. And everyone did such a heroic job of trying to fill those gaps. But if we look at the things that kids might experience, there are kids with food insecurity who depend on several meals a day that are given by the schools. There are kids with learning disabilities, developmental disabilities, and mental health issues that get access to specialists when they're at school. Kids who are socialized and practicing social skills and relationship building, which is the basis of probably everything that we do when we're working with kids. But there are eyes and ears on those kids every day when they're physically with us, so that we can tell if a kid is struggling, if a kid is not safe, if there might be something happening at home. I was really struck in the beginning of all of this that some of the statistics coming out of the child abuse hotline were that those hotline calls were down by 40 or 50% in the spring quarter. And it just really tells me about the impact of teachers and school staff on our kids on a daily basis. And so I think we have to continue these conversations to creatively fill those gaps for kids.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. And in the chat, somebody had asked about if there was, what about trauma-informed training? Is there a move through the state for that training for school personnel? I can tell you that from as a candidate running for a state superintendent, one of the things I'm very interested in is social emotional learning standards. I just see that would be so beneficial for our state. We know there's so much research out there that shows that when we have schools that are using social emotional learning standards with that focus, that there are less behavior problems with students. The list goes on. There's actually a huge economic benefit to it as well. I don't want to take over the panel here, but I can tell you that is something I will be working with the Board of Public Ed to commit to that conversation, to say, is this something that Montana needs to look at? There are about 18 to 20 other states right now who have social emotional learning standards in place K-12. I would love to have those in place pre-K through 12. And so I'm really committed to that conversation. And like I said, placing an emphasis on mental health, I see those as so connected. So Sue, that's kind of a roundabout answer to your question, but I hope to be a proud advocate for social emotional learning standards and trauma-informed practice training. All right, I'm going to keep moving us on. I knew this was going to go by super fast, but there are still lots of more questions, so I'm going to keep moving us. So this next question is more about socialization. And so I'm curious what the panelists' opinions are about how do parents make sure that children are being socialized and that they have this socializing that they used to just be able to have in school, that they aren't necessarily having anymore if they're not going to school. What are your thoughts about how parents can make sure socializing is happening for kids?
As a mom, my first instinct is to answer that as a mom. And I had said before, I have 14-year-old twin boys, and their entire life revolves around socializing, everything. And it's going back to that question of, how do parents balance that fear? How do you address the fear that we have, but yet, this is the opposite end of the spectrum, but still socialize our children. And it is, for me personally, it is a challenge. But, I think for me, I've had to allow my children to choose to return to school. They wanted to go back to school, as scary as that was for me. Allowing them to return to school because they wanted to go was very different than what we had experienced previously. But you know, in our center, in our work, and Ann and I work pretty closely together. We've offered many opportunities to bring our kids together. Ann can speak much more to that than I can, but you know, offering just opportunities for people to come together, for kids to interact, whether it's, you know, through Zoom meetings or whatever that might be. But just having to get super creative in allowing our children to interact with others. It is challenging, and I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer, but you know, just being creative with how we respond and trusting our instincts too.
Thanks, Lily. Yeah, Ann, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, so at All Nations, we've developed a virtual summit, and we had youth and every Wednesday in June come together and talk and share their talents. We do scavenger hunts, so it's just a way to see their faces, have them see our faces and interact. But also, youth have been using social media to socialize for a while now. And so I like that it gives adults the opportunity to learn about social media and how are you socializing and who are you talking to when you're on NBA 2K and who is that? And just kind of, they have social groups already on social media, and now it's really the adults' turn to learn from them. And it's a great learning experience for everybody. And I love, like, I have 4 kids myself, and they love to teach me different things too. They love to teach me on like how to do Snapchat or look at this TikTok video. And so it's really a great avenue for adults too to learn how to socialize via social media. So I feel like learning from our kids is something that's really great coming from this.
Such a great point. And, you know, as you were talking, I was sort of chuckling because that's exactly what has happened in my house. I have 2 teenage daughters who are, you know, they love to teach me their TikTok dances. And, you know, just thinking back to March, I had no idea really what TikTok was. I'm okay to admit that. And so I've learned a lot from the kids in my house. And like you said, just learning how are they socializing? How are they using Instagram? I've learned a lot, and it's been a great conversation starter as well. John, were you going to add something?
Yeah, just a small balancing point. I know that sometimes we also may need to limit or minimize or structure the amount of social media that our kids are exposed to. And along with that, I would just say, don't underestimate the power of the social dynamic between parents and children. Playing games, you know, face-to-face contact, positive routines and interactions. Parents are really the heart of the social learning that children and emotional learning that children do. And so I hope parents will honor their own power and influence.
I could quickly say, I was going to say the same thing, John, that I think, you know, again, what Lily and Ann said about finding some friends and ways for them to engage with their friends. But also I have, as a mom, and then also just watching, you know, families across Montana cope with this has been a strangely open kind of window in time when we have all this time with our families that we never would have otherwise. And so I think it's also an opportunity to hang out and play more games. And it's on us as parents and community, you know, adults, to find ways to engage young people. But I think it's especially for families that don't necessarily have that historically, to spend more time together across generations and try as much as you can to see the upshots.
Thanks, Cora. So along those same lines of knowing that many families have spent more time together, parents are taking on more responsibility for helping with education of children, learning games, learning TikTok, whatever that is, building sort of their family unit. There's also, I would say parents are also taking on just a lot more responsibility to educate their children and are seeing more mental health issues crop up, possibly more so than they would have if children were in school. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are about, when parents do see some mental health issues or, possible depression, things that they may be worried about popping up with their kids. What do we do? How do parents address those concerns and those issues?
I guess the first thing I would say is to go back to what Anne said early on, and that is having some mental health symptoms is a natural and normal reaction to these difficult circumstances. And so I worry about pathologizing children when in fact we all are probably experiencing some mental health issues and problems. And beyond that, I think it's really important for parents to learn about really positive parenting practices. It's really important to be encouraging and supportive, to develop plans for dealing with children's fears. It's important to do those positive social interactions, to listen to children, to listen to their fears and their pains and their concerns, and to try to problem solve with them about how to resolve those things. At the same time, obviously children need limits. Children will not always make the best choices. And so we need to be present as parents to set some of those limits and guide them toward better choices. I do really love what Cora said about this being an opportunity. It's an opportunity for parents to support their children's mental health, and hopefully parents will avail themselves of that opportunity.
Thanks, John. Would anyone else like to comment?
I could just say, I think that one of the things that we've utilized in our family, and again, I'm seeing this more broadly, is that we do have, another thing that's been normalized in this time is online doctor's visits. And so I don't actually have anything now, but it's something I can look up and share. Maybe somebody else does, but there are hotlines, there's online therapy, there are actually suddenly a lot of resources that I think aren't going to go away. After COVID ends, I think we're getting really savvy with tech and care. And so I would just say that maybe doing some, I know that they're depending on your health insurance coverage and what's offered through the state, and that's something I'd be happy to look up. I think that there are some resources to offer that parents can offer their kids.
Thanks, Cora. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So I'm going to keep moving us along only because of time. And I want to make sure that we are leaving folks with some really tangible things that they can do, maybe right even after our Zoom call tonight, just that they are walking away with some real things that they can do for themselves or the people they care about. So I want to start sort of with just what your thoughts are about your techniques for dealing or handling stress. Obviously, COVID has presented many stressful situations for teachers, parents, educators, community members. No matter who you are, it's been stressful for everyone. I'm curious what's your best technique for how to handle stress?
I'll answer. At All Nations, we were sent home as of March 16th. That was our first day home. And so I have been home with my 4 children and my 2 dogs since March 16th. And, there's nothing like trying to work from home and manage children. Never did I think I would be doing that. And I want to acknowledge, I think it was Cora who said earlier about, spending this amount of time with my children has been unexpected. And I don't know in my life when I would have ever been able to spend this type of time with my children. And so some of the things that we've done together are to have dinner together at night. And I mentioned I have teenage sons and they don't want anything to do with me right now, but I don't care. they have dinner with us. And so just having dinner together has really meant a lot to me. And looking at their faces as we sit at the table together has been a big deal. And just, taking our dogs for a walk, doing those things together has been really meaningful. Being a therapist is a stressful job as it is. And so, and can be very overwhelming. And so just being able to interact in very simple ways has been the number one thing for me in managing some of the stress and overwhelm of the situation that we're in right now.
Lily.
So I teach at the University of Montana. I could lecture on stress management for like many hours, and I see some of my former students out there kind of rolling their eyes right now. But anyway, let me just, there's really only one goal with stress management, and that is emotional, physical, psychological calmness. Now, how we achieve that is different for different people. Some people find spiritual or religious paths toward calmness and centering to be their preferred method. Other people do mindfulness meditation that's maybe more secular. Still, other people go outside in nature, and others exercise. And so what I want to emphasize is everybody should find their sweet spot and their own main go-to stress management comfort stimulus or process that they can enact themselves over and over again.
Such a beautiful, I'm just going to echo what John and Lily both said so beautifully, but with my clients, in the beginning, people got pretty overwhelmed, and the littles especially. And so I tried to pare it down to 4 things, kind of using a lot of what you all just talked about. But every day, just do one thing from each of 4 categories. Do something for your brain, right? So whether that's reading or learning or exploring, do something for your spirit. Find something that brings you joy every day, that's just play or fun that you can do. Move your body, right? And then do something for someone else, right? And I think that there is something that connectedness piece that we've all felt in the beginning, that we're in this together. And I worry a little that we're starting to lose that as things become more divisive as we go along. But I think that when we do something and we connect with someone else, we create those threads of togetherness that essentially are going to be where our healing lies.
Thanks, Kathy. Anne, did you want to add on?
Yeah, I agree with what everybody said. I just wanted to add something that working with parents, you teach routines and how wonderful it is to have a routine. And I think it was John that said that there's like this lack of control and fear, and especially with this pandemic and what everything's going on, kids can feel like they don't know what's happening. And so having a routine can be really helpful and be less stressful because you know what's going to happen. You know what the day is going to look like, and that can help kids too.
Cora?
Yes, and I just typed in what Kathy said, because I really love that. I love everything that's been said so far. Dinner with kids, integrated kind of calmness, and setting, I would say, and a little bit that like making a schedule, and then also celebrating successes. Because one of the things that I think we all probably agree on is that time feels very mushy, right? We don't know what day it is. We don't know what week it is. We don't know what month it is. And that's not very good for your brain and for your psyche and your energy. So I think finding a way to celebrate and mark the week or celebrate successes and just be proud that we've gotten through this far, et cetera, because we're balancing so much. So I love that. And then I would say 2 things. One, coaches with athletes, one of the things that they do to really help them succeed is visualization. And I think that what we are really suffering from right now is no end in sight. We don't know how this is going to end, right? And because we have the leadership that we have, and why we are all here to support leaders like Melissa, is because they're not guiding us. And if they were, we would feel very different. We really would. Mental health, the tone at the top that we're getting is affecting our mental health. Like the chaos, the denial, the stoking fires, like we are all, whether we're even watching or not, really being impacted by that. And so I think that one thing that I use in my work is kind of like guided visualization, and you can do it for yourself. But if you can close your eyes and travel to, let's say 6 months from now, just to give us all a little wiggle room, when things are sort of returning to normal and we're feeling, you know, sort of whatever that is, whatever returning to feeling good and free and whole, and or whatever it is that you're looking for. I think that will help us get through this time, just like athletes are preparing to win a game. And so I would say, you know, a guided visualization around coming out of this healthy and safe and feeling good. And then breathe. The other one is breathe. And I'm going to ask, if you don't mind, Melissa, if we all just want to do really quickly, we have how many? 66 people on this call. If everyone wants to join me in what is called the box breath, and it's great for every single age. I see, yeah, some of you may know this already, but this is just 4 breaths, four counts in, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. So is it okay, Melissa, if we all just do that together right now? Okay, so empty your lungs, sit in your seat, just feel present, and everyone take, I'll just count in, 1, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4. And that is a beautiful way of resetting anytime in the day. It's also good for your lungs. And we know with COVID that kind of lung capacity is an important part of staying healthy. So visualization and breath.
Thank you all for that. There were so many things I felt I wanted to be a teacher and be taking notes as you were talking. There were so many great ideas, and I loved how John, how you talked about that. You know, we all have our thing, right? That helps us relieve stress, and it's not always the same. And I have to always remember that or think about that in my family, even that what one member of my family is doing to relieve stress is not necessarily what I would choose, and to be aware of what those are so that I can be a better caregiver and a mom and a wife, and so that I can also recognize when the people who are, that I love so dearly, when they are stressed out, so that I can say, you know, I see that you are, you know, have your headphones in listening to music. What's going on? You seem to be, you know, isolating alone. Thank you for that. That was wonderful. And thank you for the breathing. I have done that before with educators during professional development, and it always feels strange to do it virtually, which I've been doing lately, but it is so helpful. So thank you for having us all do that. So I kind of have one last question before we wrap up, because it is getting to be about that time. And my last question is about promoting and preventing. And so I am just thrilled that you all agreed to be here tonight and just to give up some time and have this conversation about something that I think is so important, which is mental health. And we know that when we promote mental health, we help people improve their health and their well-being. They have positive self-esteem, and we know that they see themselves as valued and contributing members of their communities. I'm wondering more about prevention. Are there things that we can be doing to prevent the likelihood of the people we care about developing mental illness? You all are very quiet.
Okay. So when I think about prevention, I think about building blocks. And so everything that everyone just shared, all of those pieces, paying attention to our breath, to our joy, to our connectedness, building relationships, those are the building blocks of how we stay healthy. And that scaffolding is also part of the building blocks for prevention. Awareness, and oftentimes for mental health, it's also about combating some of the stigma around what it means to be mentally ill. And what it means to be struggling, and to normalize that. I loved what John said earlier, that instead of pathologizing struggle, we are human beings and we are going to struggle. And so I think that normalization paired with awareness can be a really powerful first step for us to move towards prevention.
Thanks, Kathy. It's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about social emotional learning standards. I really do see that as a step towards prevention when we can help bring everyone or bring awareness to everyone. So thanks for your comments. John, were you going to add something?
Yeah, you know what Kathy said earlier about reaching out to other people and the social connection. I wanted to emphasize that partly because I know one of the things that's happening right now is we're all getting activated. We're getting triggered by these immense stressors, right? And it causes a physiological, emotional, mental reaction. And I think, you know, people sometimes talk about fight or flight. I've stopped using that terminology because fight or flight was developed based on research with male rats. And we can do better than fight or flight. And one of the other phrases sometimes used is when stress strikes, to tend and befriend. In other words, think about how can we help others in our community? What can we do to reach out to make other people's lives better? And I thought Kathy's 4 ideas of the homework that she gives people were fabulous. I would add to those culture and finding the right cultural connection, and the meaning that goes with that is so important to health and well-being. And the other thing I would add is talking and listening, and that kind of exchange. It's so therapeutic. And you can do it expressively through journaling as well, if that's a better modality for you. And so there are a lot of things we can do, I think, to help contribute to prevention. And so thank you. Thanks so much for hosting this event.
Thank you for joining in the conversation. Lily, do you want to add?
Yeah, I think, you know, all of the suggestions are really great. And I think, you know, for a lot of people, they work. For a lot of people, they don't work. And I hate to be that person, but I think it's important that, you know, I guess a person of color's perspective be represented. You know, in the community that I work in with Native people, in many ways, mental illness is unavoidable, and it doesn't have to be, you know, like a diagnosis of schizophrenia or a diagnosis of bipolar, but you know, trauma is present and it's active, whether it's currently it's in our current situation with COVID. And so I think, you know, for me as a professional, but also again as a mom and as a part of my Native community, being just somebody that is open and available for people to come to, you know, whether that means I am there as a therapist or I'm there as a friend, to just hold hands with somebody or to sit with them, to listen to them, whatever that looks like. I think just always communicating that I'm here. And I think I've said that a million times in my short lifetime, my 25 years. That was a joke. To many of my own family members, you know, that when people are struggling with addiction, which we haven't talked about in this meeting, but you know, addiction and mental illness very much go hand in hand. And so just putting the message out there that, you know, when you're ready, I'm here. When you are ready, I am here. And I think all of us, you know, whether as professionals or just as community members, can put that out there that when you're ready, I am here. And just making space for the people we care about, and the people we don't know either. So.
Thank you, Lily. Kathy, did you want to add? I couldn't tell. You were off mute, but I wasn't sure. No, okay. Just being sure. So it is about time for us to say goodbye, and I just want to say one more time how appreciative I am that you could all be here. Lily's exactly right. We didn't even get to so many things. We could continue to have this conversation because it is so important, and there are so many things. So I hope that this is just the beginning of a continued conversation. It is so important. I'm glad that you were all here with me to just raise awareness of mental health. I'm really looking forward to, again, continuing this conversation, hopefully as your next state superintendent. And I wanted to say thanks one more time for being here this evening. And I'm wishing you all a well stress-free evening, and so that you find whatever it is that you need to do tonight for yourself to relieve some stress. And with that, I'll say goodbye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.